A jagged obsidian arrowhead shatters the air, tearing through the heavy steel links of a Spanish breastplate as if they were wet parchment. On the bone-white sands of La Florida, the invasion machine hasn't found a golden paradise, it has found a shallow grave. The Calusa warriors are not cowering in the face of European thunder, they are hunting the men who thought they were gods, turning the tide of history with a single lethal volley. How did the most powerful empire on the planet, the same force that methodically dismantled the Aztecs and the Incas, lose its way in the mangroves and the high deserts of the north? In the south, Spain was a precise surgeon of conquest. In the north, it became a cornered animal, bleeding out in a landscape it could neither map nor master. Why did the 7 cities of gold turn out to be nothing more than ghosts, mud, and the stench of decay? Today, we strip away the romanticized myth of the Fountain of Youth to examine the raw, terrifying forces of geopolitical asphyxiation and psychological logistics. We are investigating the Iron Frontier, the precise moment Spain's northern ambition collided with a biological and tactical wall that even the finest Toledo steel couldn't break. This is the full, unvarnished history of the Spanish attempt to forge an empire where the land itself fought back. One famous theory, proposed by historian David J. Weber, suggests that Spain's failure in the north was not due to a lack of military might, but a fundamental failure of environmental adaptation. In 1513, Juan Ponce de León turned his prows towards what he imagined was a land of rejuvenating springs. Instead, he found a biological fortress. To understand the logistical nightmare, think of 16th century Florida not as a vacation destination, but a modern-day supermax prison. It was a labyrinth of impenetrable mangroves and razor-edged sawgrass where an army of 600 could be whittled down to a handful of survivors by starvation and a single well-placed poisoned arrow. In 1521, Ponce de León returned with an invasion force equivalent to several modern infantry battalions. He brought seeds, livestock, and tools, intending to build a permanent colony. But the Calusa people were masters of asymmetric warfare. They attacked the Spanish from the water in massive cedar canoes, moving with the speed the heavy Spanish carracks couldn't match.
Ponce de León was struck in the thigh by a poisoned arrow and died shortly after in Cuba. Florida remained a dark hole on the Spanish map, a sea of darkness on land. But here is where the story takes a turn from tragedy toward absolute surrealist horror. The 1528 Narváez expedition was a masterclass in logistical collapse. Panfilo de Narváez entered the Florida interior with 600 men, but he committed the ultimate sin of command. He separated his land forces from his support ships. As the ships were blown off course by a hurricane, the land force was left stranded in a hostile swamp. Relentlessly hounded by the Appalachian people who utilized the terrain as a tactical force multiplier, the Spanish were reduced to eating their own horses. Imagine a modern carrier strike group being forced to melt down their fighter jets to build rowboats. That was the level of desperation. They used horse hides to stitch together 5 crude, leaky rafts, attempting to sail across the Gulf of Mexico. Of the 600 who began, only 4 survived. Among them was Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca and an enslaved Moroccan named Estebanico. They spent 8 years wandering the American Southwest, surviving only by transforming themselves into faith healers for the tribes. When they finally stumbled back into Spanish territory in 1536, they carried no gold, but they carried a rumor that would act as a fresh biological fuse: the legend of Cibola, the 7 cities of gold. In 1540, Francisco Vázquez de Coronado led what historians call a military-religious complex northward. His troop count was staggering: 300 armored Spaniards, 1,000 Tlaxcalan allies, and 1,500 head of livestock. This was a traveling city. When they reached the Zuni pueblo of Hawiku, they expected to see walls of gold. Instead, they saw multi-story stone dwellings shimmering in the heat. The Zuni drew a line of sacred cornmeal on the ground, the 16th century equivalent of a no trespassing sign backed by religious law. Coronado, desperate to justify the massive investment of the Spanish crown, ordered a total assault. The Zuni fought with a ferocity that stunned the conquistadors, raining heavy stones from the rooftops that nearly crushed Coronado's helmet. Hawiku fell, but the extraction mission was a failure. There was no gold. Frustrated, Coronado pushed further into the Rio Grande Valley, where he encountered the Tigwex people. The winter of 1540 to 1541 became a dark pivot point. The Spanish demanded thousands of blankets and communal food stores, disrupting the Tigwex's delicate caloric equilibrium. When the Spanish began seizing women and burning villages, the Tigwex rose up.
Coronado responded with societal decapitation, burning hundreds of captives at the stake to send a message of terror across the desert. This blood-soaked mistake would create a legacy of resentment that would simmer for exactly 140 years. While Coronado searched for myths in the dust, the Spanish in the East were forced to shift their strategy from extraction to geopolitical asphyxiation. In the 1560s, French Huguenots, Protestants, established Fort Caroline in Florida. For Catholic Spain, this was like a rival superpower placing a nuclear silo in your backyard. In 1565, Pedro Menendez de Aviles founded St. Augustine. He didn't come to explore, he came to sanitize. He captured the French survivors of a shipwreck and executed them at Matanzas, the massacres, refusing to take prisoners of a different faith. St. Augustine became a fortress of faith, the hub of a new invasion machine, the Franciscan missions. These were not just churches, they were socio-economic processing plants designed to turn indigenous people into a sustainable labor force through reducciones. But the missions carried an unseen passenger, the influenza virus and smallpox. The Pueblo and Florida tribes were biologically naive. Between 1600 and 1680, the Pueblo population plummeted from 80,000 to less than 17,000. In modern terms, that is the equivalent of the United States losing 250 million people in a single lifetime. It was a societal collapse on a scale that is nearly impossible to visualize. Yet, even as the population died, the Spanish military-religious complex only pushed harder for control. In New Mexico, Governor Juan de Oñate committed the ultimate atrocity at Acoma Pueblo in 1599. After a skirmish left his nephew dead, Oñate stormed the Sky City and decreed that every male over the age of 25 have 1 foot cut off as a permanent mark of submission. This was the encomienda at its most sadistic, but it was also the beginning of the end. By 1680, a medicine man named Pope orchestrated a masterclass in psychological logistics. Using knotted cords to synchronize the timing, the Pueblos rose up simultaneously across the southwest. They killed 400 Spaniards and drove the survivors all the way back to El Paso. It remains the most successful indigenous revolt in North American history. For 12 years, the Spanish were completely expelled. When they finally returned, the social contract had to be rewritten. The Spanish were forced to abolish the encomienda and allow the Pueblos to practice their traditional spirituality alongside Catholicism. The Iron Frontier was a crucible that forged the modern world. Spain introduced the horse, which revolutionized the Great Plains, and the cattle industry, which defined the American West. We live in the wreckage and the wonder of this collision, visible in the missions of San Antonio, the architecture of Santa Fe, and the very names of our states. It was a history written in iron, blood, and societal decapitation, but it also created a unique cultural synthesis that defines the American identity. If this deep dive into the dark origins of the American story opened your eyes, subscribe to History Unlocked.
Next time, we turn our gaze toward the great river systems and northern forests to explore French exploration in Canada and the Mississippi, witnessing a machine of empire built on fur and frontier diplomacy. You do not want to miss it. Stay tuned.